Hello, in this video we'll take a look at how the connectors are working. Again, connectors have to be placed right in between the nodes. So when you make two more nodes, make sure that you also place a connector in between them. So if I duplicate these two nodes, this one and this one, the connector has to be duplicated and placed in between the nodes because this connector is drawing a sphere to get the nodes that are adjacent to it. And also please make sure that the node has the node tag and the connector has the connector tag. And also you need to make sure that the collision setup is correct. In other words, the connector system is already in place and the collision system is already in place. It doesn't need to be touched. So some of the functions are actually running and they are actually ignoring a few game objects. This is to make sure that only the objects that need to be taken into account are actually taken into account. This connector has a script which is called the connector color handler, as well as a flow machine, not a state machine. It also has a line renderer component which basically draws a line. It also has a capsule collider so that it can actually be detected by these two nodes, and also by the face handler, which will be explained in a future video. If I go to edit graph over here, there is a function which is being called. This is the adjacent node list. So we get the adjacent nodes using a overlap sphere. Now this is the reason why the nodes have to be, the connector has to be right in the middle of the node so that this overlap sphere works, which is basically an invisible sphere which is cast so that you can get the nodes that are very close to this connector. We pass this as a list and we make sure that we also add it to the list. Over here we have check functions, and this is called, the custom event is called using the check connection custom event, which is called by face handler. Now I will not be explaining face handler in this video, I'll be explaining in the next, but face handler is actually responsible for actually calling the face. It is also responsible for connecting nodes as well. So over here in the connector, we'll take a look at check connection, which is a custom event that is called when two nodes are connected or when one node is clicked. So over here we first added the nodes to the list, which is this. We are adding this to the list, and then over here we've got a function which is checking whether or not the items in the list are locked or not. If they're locked and last clicked and the nodes were the last click nodes, then we're going to run these functions which are over here. And these functions, if all of the functions over here are true and all of the statements are true, then we're going to set the color of the connector based on which player's turn it was. So if it's the player 1, then we're going to draw the line for player 1, and if it's player 2, then we're going to draw the line for player 2. Then we have the nullifying last click booleans, which basically tell the game to clear the last click booleans and set them to the false value, because all these functions are prepared. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to node, and I'm going to actually turn on the state, and over here we've got the is locked statement and we've got the is clicked statements. Now is clicked has this last clicked variable, so this is turned to false, and then when you click it, when you click the node, this is the boolean. It first turns to is locked. So we have got this boolean which is basically telling both the node A and node B to be in an is locked state, which is basically this boolean that is being passed over here to both the nodes that were actually in the list. And then we're going to call the is locked trigger. The is locked trigger is over here, and then we have these particular statements over here. And then we go over to this state where you have the boolean is clicked set to true. So once this is clicked, then we are also going to run the particular functions for the is clicked boolean. And over here we have the functions for the node B, which was explained in the previous video. So once you call the custom event for the connector, which is being handled after each and every click, these statements will run. So when you check the connection between them, all of these statements have to be true. The first statement that has to be true is whether or not the nodes were actually locked, so whether they entered the locked state or not. Then we're going to check whether both the nodes were the last click nodes. If they're not the last click nodes, we're not going to draw the connector line, because they were not the last click nodes. So they have to be last clicked and they have to be is locked. So node A and node B, the adjacent node A and node B have to be last clicked and they have to be locked for the connector to actually draw. This doesn't need an RPC function. The reason why it does not need an RPC function is because it's going to run for both the local player and the foreign player anyway, since it runs whenever the connector changes, whenever the node changes its state. So over here we've got turn was wasted, which is a C# function which tells the C# script function which tells the local player and the foreign player that the turn was wasted. Or we can also set this line renderer to active if the turn was not wasted. So over here we also have two script references to set the player belongs to string, as well as the set player1 material. So remember that each and every time a node is clicked, the connector functions are being called. Please do keep that in mind. So once all of this is done, we should have a connection between the nodes. But please do keep this in mind, that all of this is happening once all of the conditions that were in the connector are true. Then only these will function. So over here we've got the checking node clicks and drawing line. Could you keep this in mind, that if these statements are not true, this function will not run.